The grand chandelier sparkled brightly in the huge ballroom of a fancy mansion in Beverly Hills. The room was filled with rich and important people, dressed in expensive suits and shimmering gowns. The air smelled of fresh roses, perfume, and fancy food. Laughter and chatter filled the space as guests sipped champagne and showed off their wealth. Everyone wanted to be seen. Everyone wanted to be important. But standing quietly near the drinks table, unnoticed by most, was Keanu Reeves. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't showing off. He wasn't boasting about his money. He was just there, calm as always, watching. He had been invited by a mutual acquaintance, but it was clear not everyone thought he belonged. Then came Isabella Hawthorne. Isabella was one of the richest women in the city. She wore a stunning silver dress, her jewelry sparkled like stars, and her hair was perfectly styled. But behind her perfect smile, she had a sharp tongue and a cruel heart. Isabella loved to mock people. She loved to make them feel small. And tonight she had found a new target, Keanu Reeves. She walked toward him, her heels clicking against the polished marble floor. With a fake sweet smile, she tilted her head and said, "You know, Keanu, I've always wondered, do you have any real talents? Or is acting just pretend?" Her wealthy friends giggled beside her. They were waiting for him to look embarrassed. But Keanu just smiled gently, his face as calm as ever. "I like to play the piano," he said softly. Isabella's eyes lit up with mischief. "Oh really? How interesting," she laughed. "Why don't you play something for us?" She pointed to the grand piano in the corner of the room. She thought Keanu would say no. Or if he did play, he would fail terribly and everyone would laugh at him. She wanted to make him look like a fool. The room grew silent. People turned to watch. Some had smirks, expecting a disaster. Others were curious. Keanu was silent for a moment. Then, without a word, he walked toward the piano. Keanu sat down in front of the piano. He placed his fingers on the cool white keys. He took a deep breath. Then, he began to play. The moment his fingers touched the piano, something magical happened. A beautiful, haunting melody filled the air. The sound was so powerful, so full of emotion that everyone froze. The laughter stopped. The whispers disappeared. Even Isabella, who had been so eager to mock him, felt her heart tighten. The music wasn't just pretty notes. It was a story. A story filled with pain, love, and loss. It was a story that could not be spoken, only felt. Keanu's fingers moved effortlessly over the keys. His eyes were half closed, lost in the music. The room, once filled with pride and arrogance, now felt soft and fragile. Keanu played not to impress, but because the music was inside him. By the time he lifted his hands, the room was completely silent. For a moment, no one moved. Then, one person started clapping. Then another. Then another. And suddenly the entire ballroom was standing, clapping loudly, their eyes wide with amazement. Isabella was speechless. For the first time in her life, she didn't know what to say. The applause roared through the room, but Keanu stayed still. His fingers rested gently on the piano keys. His face was calm, but his eyes looked far away, as if he was remembering something painful. Isabella stood frozen. She had wanted to humiliate him. She had wanted to prove that he was just an actor. But instead, she had heard something real. His music wasn't just a song. It was painful. It was love. It was something deeply personal. A waiter walked by, offering champagne. Isabella ignored him. Her hands were clenched into fists. She forced herself to smile, to act like she wasn't affected. But deep inside, something had cracked. Keanu stood up from the piano. He didn't bow. He didn't smile. He just walked toward the exit. He never wanted attention. He never played for applause. He had played because, at that moment, the music had called to him. But just before he could leave, "Wait." Isabella's voice was soft. Keanu paused. He turned slightly, his expression calm. She hesitated. The crowd was watching again, waiting. "That song?" she said, her voice quieter than ever before. "What was it?" Keanu looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked past her as if remembering something far away. "It was for someone I lost," he said simply. His words sent a shiver through her. There was no arrogance in his voice. No need for pity or sympathy. Just the truth. The weight of his words filled the room like heavy air. Isabella, for all her wealth and power, suddenly felt small. She had spent her life surrounded by luxury, yet standing in front of Keanu, she realized she had never felt something truly real before. Isabella should have laughed it off. She should have pretended it didn't matter. But she couldn't. "Who?" she asked before she could stop herself. Keanu's jaw tightened slightly, but he did not look away. Someone who meant everything to me, he said. Isabella felt her heart ache. She had spent years tearing people down, mocking them, using her wealth and status as a shield against the world. But what had it given her? Nothing that felt real. Not like Keanu's music. Keanu looked at her one last time. Then he gave her a small, knowing smile. Not angry, not mocking, just kind. And then he turned and walked away. Isabella stood on the balcony staring at the night sky. The stars shimmered above her, but they felt so far away. For the first time in her life, she felt lost. She reached for her phone. She could find out everything about him in one call. But she hesitated. It felt wrong. Instead, she did something she hadn't done in years. She sat down, and she let herself feel. That night, Isabella changed. And she never forgot the music that had opened her heart. Isabella Hawthorne stood up from her chair. She moved past the last few guests at the party and stepped outside into the warm Los Angeles night. But she had no idea that what she was about to learn about Keanu Reeves' past would change her forever. Isabella had never followed anyone before. She was used to people coming to her. People respected her name, her money, and her beauty. But tonight, none of that mattered. There was something about Keanu that she could not ignore. Before he left, he had looked at her in a way that made her feel strange. It wasn't anger. It wasn't a pity. It was something worse. It was understanding. Isabella had seen that look before, not from someone else but in the mirror. In the moments when she let herself feel sadness, in the moments when she remembered her past, she had seen that same look in her own eyes. She needed to know more. The Los Angeles streets were quiet now. The bright lights of the city still glowed and cars moved in the distance, but everything around her felt still. She waved away her driver. She needed to walk. She needed to think. Where did Keanu go? She didn't know. And that frustrated her. She pulled out her phone. With just a few calls, she could find him easily. She had powerful friends. She had connections. But something inside her stopped her. Keanu wasn't like the others. The rich men, the actors, the businessmen who wanted to impress her. If she wanted to understand him, she couldn't treat him like them. So instead she walked. She didn't know where she was going, but she let her feet take her there. Her heels clicked on the sidewalk. Each step felt heavy, like she was carrying a weight she didn't understand. And then, almost like magic, she found herself standing in front of an old jazz lounge. It was a small, hidden place in a quiet part of the city. She had never been here before. But somehow, it felt right. Soft, slow music drifted from inside. The air smelled like old wood, whiskey, and something warm, like memories. She hesitated. Then she pushed open the door. Inside, the lights were dim. A few people sat at different tables, lost in their own worlds. And then, she saw him. At the back of the room, sitting alone at a worn-out piano, was Keanu Reeves. He wasn't playing. Not yet. He just sat there, his head slightly down, his fingers resting on the piano keys. It was like he was trying to decide if he should play again or not. His presence was quieter than the room itself. It felt like he was carrying a whole world of memories inside him. Isabella's heart started beating faster. She had spent her life around powerful men, actors, businessmen, and politicians. They were always so full of themselves, thinking they were the most important people in the world. But Keanu? He wasn't like them. His silence had more meaning than all the loud words of the men she had met before. And for the first time in her life, she didn't know what to say. Isabella wasn't used to feeling small. But standing in front of Keanu, she felt small in a way she had never felt before. And then he lifted his eyes and saw her. For a moment, there was a flicker of recognition in his gaze. But he wasn't surprised. It was almost as if he had expected her to find him. Isabella stepped forward. She had planned to say something. But now, every word she had rehearsed in her mind was gone. She just stood there waiting. Keanu was the first to speak. And when he did, his words were not what she expected. "I wasn't playing for them," Keanu said softly. Isabella blinked. Keanu let out a slow breath. His fingers finally pressed against the piano. A single note filled the room like a whisper. "I was playing for her," he said. Isabella's chest tightened. She could feel that this wasn't just about music. This was about a person. Someone Keanu had lost. Isabella had lost people too. Her mother had died when she was young. But she had buried that pain deep inside, covering it with money, parties, and luxury. She had never let it define her. But Keanu? Keanu wore his pain like a second skin. She wanted to ask, who was she? What happened to her? But she was afraid of the answer. Instead, she said the only thing that felt right. Play for her again. Keanu's eyes searched hers for a long moment. It was like he was deciding if she was worthy of hearing the music. Then, without a word, he began to play. The first note sent a shiver down Isabella's spine. The melody was soft. It wasn't just music. It was love. It was grief. It was a story without words. Isabella closed her eyes and let it wash over her. For the first time in her life, she let herself feel. She didn't know it yet, but this night would change everything. Isabella Hawthorne had spent her life running from the past, and Keanu Reeves had spent his life carrying it. But now, their stories were about to intertwine in ways neither of them could have imagined. The jazz lounge seemed to fade away as the music surrounded her. The sound of glasses clinking, voices whispering, the soft hum of conversation, it all disappeared. There was only him. Only the way his fingers moved over the piano keys. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the music stopped. The absence of sound felt like a cold wind against her skin. Keanu let his hands rest on the keys. He stared at them like he had just shared a secret he never meant to tell. His expression was blank, but Isabella could see it. The way his shoulders tensed. The way his breath came just a little uneven. She wanted to say something. Anything. But for the first time in her life, words failed her. Keanu finally turned to her. His dark eyes were calm, but distant. "Why are you here, Isabella?" She swallowed hard. She didn't know. I don't know. It was the truth. She hadn't planned this. She had followed something. A feeling. A pull she didn't understand. Keanu studied her for a long moment. Then he turned back to the piano. "You don't belong here." The words hurt more than she expected. Because he was right. She didn't belong in places like this. She belonged in the world of power, control, and luxury. And yet, here she was. Isabella hesitated. Then slowly she sat down on the worn leather seat next to him. She wasn't sure why. She just knew she couldn't leave. Not yet. After a long silence, she whispered, "Who was she?" Keanu didn't answer right away. His fingers hovered over the piano keys. And then, softly, he began to tell her a story. A story that would change everything. Keanu took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. He finally said the name. Lillian. The name stayed in the air between them, soft but heavy. Isabella felt something change in that moment. Something she couldn't see, something delicate. She didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. She waited, letting Keanu decide if he wanted to continue talking or not. Keanu's voice was calm, but there was sadness in it. A sadness that had been there for a long time, like a wound that had never truly healed. "She was my fiancée." Isabella felt a shiver run through her body. She hadn't expected that. Keanu's fingers tightened slightly against the piano keys. "We were supposed to get married in April," he continued. "It was all planned, the flowers, the venue, the honeymoon, everything." Isabella felt her heart tighten in her chest. She had never known a love like that. In her world, love was just a game. People bought love with gifts and fancy things. They dressed it up with diamonds and champagne. But real love? The kind that lasts? She had never seen it before. But this was different. This was real. She swallowed hard before asking softly, What happened?" Keanu closed his eyes for a moment before looking at her again. "She died." The words were simple, but they carried so much pain. Isabella stopped breathing for a second. She had expected heartbreak, but not this. Not the kind of loss that never truly goes away. Keanu turned back to the piano, his fingers hovering over the keys again. "It was a car accident," he said. His voice was quiet, but Isabella could hear the pain in it. 1 minute she was there, and the next. He trailed off, shaking his head. "I never got to say goodbye." Isabella felt something inside her break. She had spent her whole life pushing people away, telling herself that love wasn't real. That love was just a business deal. But Keanu had loved someone with all his heart. And then, in one moment, he had lost everything. She wanted to say something. She wanted to tell him that he wasn't alone. But she knew that no words could ever make it better. Some pain was just too deep for that. So instead, she did the only thing she could. She reached out. First, she hesitated. Then, gently, she placed her hand over his. Keanu's fingers tensed under hers. For a second, she thought he might pull away. But he didn't. For a long time, neither of them said anything. But the silence wasn't empty. It was filled with so many things. Pain, understanding, something Isabella had never felt before. Something fragile. Something real. For the first time in her life, Isabella wasn't the center of the universe. Sitting beside Keanu, her hand resting lightly over his, she felt like a stranger in a moment too raw, too delicate for her to interrupt. But she didn't move. And Keanu didn't pull away. The silence between them stretched, but it wasn't cold. It was filled with 1,000 unspoken words. With pain and memories. With something Isabella had never let herself feel before. Vulnerability. Keanu took a deep breath. Then, slowly, he turned his hand beneath hers. His fingers brushed softly against her palm, a silent way of saying, "I know you're here." But he didn't look at her. His eyes stayed on the piano, as if he could still feel the past hanging in the air around them. "Lillian loved music," he murmured. His voice was so soft that Isabella almost didn't hear it. She used to say that every song tells a story. That even without words, you can feel what someone is trying to say. Isabella swallowed hard. "She sounds amazing," she whispered. Keanu's lips lifted into the smallest, saddest smile. She was. Isabella had never believed in love. Not the kind that lasted. Not the kind that hurts. She had seen too many relationships fall apart. Too many marriages that were just business deals, wrapped in expensive white dresses and fancy parties. But as she listened to Keanu talk about Lillian, she realized, maybe she had been wrong. She felt something strange inside her chest. Something she had never felt before. Jealousy. Not Lillian. But of what Keanu and Lillian had shared. Of what it meant to love someone so much that losing them left a permanent scar. Isabella had never allowed herself to love like that. Maybe because she had always been too afraid to lose. Keanu finally turned to her. His dark eyes were deep and unreadable. "Why are you really here, Isabella?" The question caught her off guard. She could have given so many different answers. She could have said she was curious. She could have said she just wanted to understand why his music made her feel so much. She could have lied. But instead she told him the truth. "Because I didn't want to forget this feeling." Keanu studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Just once. He understood. And then, without another word, he turned back to the piano. His fingers moved gently across the keys. A new song began to play. This time the melody was different. Softer. Warmer. It wasn't drenched in sorrow anymore. It was filled with something else. Something gentler. Something that felt like hope. Isabella closed her eyes and listened. For the first time in her life, she let herself feel. Maybe she would leave tonight and never see Keanu again. Or maybe, just maybe, this was only the beginning of something neither of them had been looking for. But right now, at this moment, there was only music. And for now, that was enough. If you enjoyed this story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more exciting stories filled with adventure, mystery, and unforgettable moments. Your support means the world. It keeps these stories coming and the creativity flowing. Thanks for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.